So have you ever noticed how political opponents aren't just called, wrong anymore?
Yeah, they're labeled as if they're literally sick.
Exactly. Like they have a clinical condition. And that is exactly what we are getting into today. Welcome to the Deep Dive. We are exploring a really fascinating, highly charged blog post by Mark Wells. It's called Pathologizing Resistance, How Pseudoscience Shields the Imperial Machine.
It is a heavy title, but a really incredible read.
It really is. And just a quick note for you listening right now, because this source dives into some very intense geopolitical and religious topics, our goal today is not to endorse or, take sides on the author's viewpoints.
Right, we're just here to impartially unpack the argument.
Exactly. We just want to look at his core thesis, which is about how power structures throughout history have basically weaponized scientific-sounding language to delegitimize political resistance.
And if you want the so what right up front, Wells is arguing that imperial and corporate powers basically rebrand their raw, ambition-like resource extraction as this objective civilizational progress.
Right. And they use clinical language as a shield to do it.
Exactly. Because if you can diagnose the people resisting you as being, psychologically defective, you don't have to engage with their actual political grievances.
You just have to contain them. Which brings us to the 19th century blueprint for this whole tactic. To understand how modern resistance is pathologized, we really have to look at the past.
The history here is, it's pretty shocking.
It is. So in 1851, there was this doctor named Samuel Adolphus Cartwright, and he created a formal psychiatric diagnosis called drapetomania.
Drapetomania, right?
Yeah. And this was a supposed mental illness that caused enslaved Black people to flee captivity. And the prescribed cure for this disease was more whipping and harder labor.
Wow.
Yeah. Okay, let's unpack this because it is basically the ultimate systemic form of gaslighting. It's like breaking someone's leg and then diagnosing them with a psychiatric disorder because they're screaming in pain.
That is a perfect analogy because you have to look at what the American plantocracy was trying to do there.
The plantation owners, you mean?
Right, the ruling class. They needed a way to protect the brutal institution of chattel slavery. And Cartwright's diagnosis did exactly that by wrapping it in the untouchable authority of science.
Because Cartwright actually argued that this defect was brought on by masters who were too humane.
Exactly. By framing the universal human desire for freedom as a psychological defect, they successfully shifted the blame entirely onto the victims. It's a brilliant, completely evil bit of PR.
So the oppressor isn't a tyrant anymore. They're just administering a harsh but, scientifically necessary medical treatment.
Right. And Wells argues that history doesn't really invent new methods of oppression. It updates the vocabulary.
Which brings us to today. This source argues that this exact same intellectual fraud is being deployed right now against the Muslim world.
Yeah. And the mechanism they use to do this is something sociologists call racialization.
Right, because Islam isn't a race.
No, not at all. Islam is a theological choice. It spans, 2 billion people across every single continent. It's incredibly diverse.
Yeah, definitely.
But political establishments collapse all of that diversity into a single inherited biological trait. They treat it like a race.
So they can apply those old colonial tropes to it.
Exactly. Once you racialize a group, you can seamlessly apply these massive pseudoscientific frameworks to them. And Wells breaks this modern playbook down into 3 main fronts.
Right. And the first one is this idea of the demographic threat, which uses, distorted math and biology.
Like the Great Replacement theory.
Yes, exactly. This claim that higher Muslim birth rates are somehow a biological invasion. But wait a minute, isn't demographic stabilization a known sociological fact? Doesn't the math actually show birth rates eventually dropping?
Yes, absolutely. And that is exactly Wells' counterpoint here. These demographic threat models are intentionally fraudulent. They take a temporary spike in birth rates, which sometimes happens with first-generation immigrants, and they project it infinitely into the future.
Ignoring what actually happens in reality.
Right, because legitimate science shows that within 1 to 2 generations, once immigrant communities integrate and gain economic mobility, their birth rates normalize.
But the threat models ignore that, so they can frame a normal population dynamic as a viral spread.
Exactly. It's bad math used to create a public health panic.
Wow. Okay, so what's the second front?
The second front is behavioral determinism. This leans into genetics.
Oh, right. The debunked Islamic gene myth. The idea that Muslims are just hardwired by biology for aggression or tribalism.
Yeah, it's essentially 21st century phrenology. And what makes this genetic essentialism so incredibly dangerous is what it actively ignores.
Which is the material reality.
Exactly. It blames biology for things that are actually the direct result of geopolitical instability, foreign military interventions, and just severe economic devastation.
So you bomb a country's infrastructure, collapse its economy, and then look at the chaos and say, well, it must be in their DNA.
Right. You completely erase the person holding the match.
It's just wild. And then the third front the author talks about is civilizational psychoanalysis.
Which is using clinical psychiatric terminology on a 1,400-year-old faith.
It's like trying to retrospectively diagnose historical figures with schizophrenia, which, I mean, how do you even do that to someone who lived in the 7th century?
You can't. Not accurately. But medical accuracy isn't the point. The point is to strip an entire group of human agency. If you decide their history is just the product of a pathology, you don't have to respect their worldview.
You just manage their symptoms.
Precisely.
And here's where it gets really interesting, because Wells notes that this pseudoscientific approach even extends to how they treat the religious texts themselves.
Pseudosciencing the Quran.
Yes, and they do this through something called linguistic literalism. They will take a highly localized 7th century Arabic idiom, something related to, say, a warfare, and translate it with this rigid wooden literalism.
Just completely ignoring how language actually functions.
Right. It would be like someone 1,000 years from now finding the phrase, "it's raining cats and dogs," translating it literally, and concluding we were terrified of livestock falling from the sky.
It's just a deliberate refusal to engage with the nuance of the era.
But the more structural manipulation is how they erase something called asbab al-nuzul.
Right, the historical context of the revelations.
Yeah. The author points out that Islamic jurisprudence relies on knowing exactly when and why a verse was revealed. Like, was it during peacetime or a specific battle for survival?
But these propagandists will rip verses completely out of that historical reality. They treat temporary defensive wartime rules as if they are permanent civilian mandates.
Which creates this totally distorted caricature of a threat. But, I mean, I have to ask, why go through this immense effort?
A lot of work, right?
Yeah. Funding think tanks, making these demographic models, aggressively text mining a religion. Why pathologize an entire faith?
Well, Wells's core thesis is that this is designed specifically to silence and contain anti-imperial resistance in the global South.
Okay, right. So it's about geopolitics.
Exactly. Think about the radicalization conveyor belt models that Western nation-states built over the last couple of decades.
These are the models that argued simple religious behaviors lead inevitably to terrorism, right?
Yeah. They argued that a guy deciding to grow a beard or giving up alcohol or just becoming more devout were actually sequential stages of a pathology leading to violent extremism.
Which gave the state an excuse to surveil basically anyone.
Right. But the massive blind spot in these models, the element they deliberately leave out, is political grievance.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so when populations in the global South resist Western military interventions or drone strikes or puppet regimes, it's not framed as a logical defense of their sovereignty.
It's framed as a sickness.
Exactly. It's diagnosed as a virus.
Which is incredibly convenient, because if resistance is just a virus, the Western corporate state apparatus completely absolves itself of any accountability.
Right. You don't have to ask if your drone strike caused the backlash. You just blame the pathology.
It's drapetomania again. They aren't fighting back because we took their land. They're fighting back because they're biologically sick.
It is the exact same playbook.
So what does this all mean for the global economy? Because if this clinical language is a shield, what is the empire actually trying to protect here?
Well, according to the source, it's protecting a social Darwinian machine, market fundamentalism.
Hypercapitalism.
Right, where multinational corporations view the entire globe purely as a playground for resource extraction and cheap labor. And in that mindset, anyone standing in the way isn't just a political opponent. They are an impediment to human evolution.
Wow. And the author highlights two specific foundational Islamic concepts that inherently threaten this hyper-capitalist model.
Yeah, this is where the theology actually clashes with the economics.
Right. The first one is the rejection of riba, or usury, basically prohibiting exploitative interest.
Which is a huge problem for Western speculative banking, right? Because that entire system is built on debt-driven growth and compound interest.
Yeah, a theology that forbids making money just by lending money is a direct structural threat to that entire banking model.
It's an existential threat.
And then the second concept is zakat, which ties into this idea of collective sovereignty over wealth.
Right, the belief that the earth ultimately belongs to God, and resources have to be managed for social justice and the poor.
Which violently resists the total privatization of public goods.
Exactly. If a community believes water and oil are collective endowments, a multinational corporation can't just swoop in and privatize them.
So if we connect this to the bigger picture...
Right, if we look at the whole map, you have a corporate machine demanding resources and a massive demographic sitting on those resources with a theology that opposes exploitative debt and privatization.
But raw bigotry is hard to defend on the global stage.
Exactly. You can't just go to the UN and say, I don't like who controls this oil, so I'm taking it.
You need a cover story.
Right. So think tanks and academics use demographics and behavioral psychology to label the group as an objective, radicalized threat.
And the empire secures its cover. The victims of corporate extraction literally become patients needing containment.
It is incredibly effective.
It really is. I mean, from the plantations of 1851 with drapetomania to modern geopolitical think tanks, pseudoscience and clinical language have just been continuously adapted to turn the victims of exploitation into the villains of their own story.
Ensuring the corporate machine runs completely unbothered by the human cost.
It's a lot to take in.
It is.
Yeah.
But, I want to leave the listener with a final thought to mull over. Something that brings this all a little closer to home.
Oh, definitely. Let's hear it.
We've seen how powerful empires use clinical language to silence global resistance, right? But what about our daily lives? Modern political and social discourse relies so heavily on diagnosing the people we disagree with.
Oh, wow, yeah. Like therapy speak?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Casually labeling someone as toxic, narcissistic, or deranged just because they have a different view. How often are we unwittingly borrowing the empire's playbook? Like, are we shutting down genuine communication by pathologizing someone rather than engaging with their actual grievances?
Yeah, that's a really challenging question to sit with. Are we treating people like patients just to avoid being wrong?
That's definitely something to think about.
It really is. Well, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the narrative, keep looking for that missing context, and we'll catch you next time.